Hi everyone, Materim here again with another RPG Talks, and today's topic is going to be designing and creating Pantheons of Gods for your Dungeons and Dragons game. Now, I'm going to draw a lot on my own experience with my homebrew world, Megana, who I've been running with for 15 years or so now, in kind of some general thoughts on what you want to think about when designing pantheons. Now, for me, uh, designing the Pantheon of Gods is always the first thing I do when I deal with a world. You really want to know the beings that shape the world before you can really give a feel for the world itself. So, a couple of things that I want to think about when I am creating a pantheon is the place of the gods in the world and what they represent. Now, if you look at a lot of different fantasy worlds, you typically have gods representing and controlling one of two things: either physicalities, like for instance, Thor is the god of thunder, he is the god of lightning, it is a physical thing he is in control of. Or you have gods of emotional states or things that are fundamentally tied to humanity. For instance, Aphrodite is the goddess of love. Now, it's very important to decide which of those sorts of things are worthy of divine representation. And if you're going to use both, which is a totally fine way of doing it, you have to decide which is more important. Because those sorts of things can easily go into helping to build the relationships between your pantheons. And knowing the relationships between the gods in your pantheon will help you flesh out the world in how the followers of those gods or the kingdoms that worship those gods and what have you are going to interact. In my world of Megana, vast majority of the gods are connected to fundamental states of humanity. There are gods of bravery, gods of love, gods of fury and rage, and gods of loss. And for the most part, those are your moderate gods. Then there are your greater gods, who are gods of much larger ideas, like the god of death, the goddess of life. Those sorts of things are fundamentally larger, and those gods can exist without the input of mortals' faith. The gods who are of things like love rely on the faith of mortals to maintain and sustain them. So it automatically builds two tiers of gods, and so you have different interactions. You have, in a lot of cases, some of the lesser gods who are allies with, or maybe even subordinates to the greater gods, that sort of thing. And so it really automatically gives me a lot of different options in terms of storytelling. Number two, you want to decide if the gods are universal or the gods are race-based. I know, for instance, the Forgotten Realms world, they've got gods for each race and everything, and so you can definitely do that, but keep in mind, if that is the way you go, you're going to have a huge pantheon. You're going to have hundreds of gods, which there's nothing wrong with that idea, but it can often, particularly for somebody designing a world for the first time, become very overwhelming. Now, a way I prefer to do it is that the gods themselves are universal, but since they represent different ideologies that are present in greater or lesser extents to different races, that each race has their own way of looking at that god, their own name for it, and to the humans, or to the mortals, they may seem like very different gods, but it's just different ways of worshiping the same divine entity. And I like it that way because it keeps things simple. It limits the number of gods I have to create, but it allows them to have unique flavors within the eyes of the different mortal races, which is good. Number three, you want to really define what a god is and if it is possible for mortals to attain that status. Now, in my particular world, mortals can become the lesser gods. They are have to do great things and attain what's called a soul will, which is the source of the god's power, that is connected to the various domain that they're trying to control, but it's possible. However, the greater gods are beings of such immense power and connected to such fundamental building blocks of the universe that it is very, very difficult for mortals to come by that. And so it has not but once in my campaign's entire, or my campaign world's entire run, that a mortal has attained that. And that is literally a world-altering event. But there is some upward mobility there, which is cool because it gives the players, particularly the ones who are a little bit more ambitious, gives them something to work for. I mean, the idea that they could be gods of the world is definitely a driving force. And then the last thing I think is very important when designing your Pantheon is to remember that the gods that you empower are ostensibly the ones who have created the world. And so you need to understand where each god, where their place is in that creation. Are they enemies of each other? Was the world built as a collaborative effort by the gods? Was the world something that's already there that the gods stumbled upon and are jealously fighting over? Each of these stories is going to lead to a drastically different history in your campaign and a drastically different place for those gods and those who would choose to follow them. There's not really a right or a wrong answer to that, but you definitely want to think about it, because if you're interacting with a faith whose god literally created the seas, there is a certain prestige there that would necessarily not be if this god just happened to stumble upon them and was given the domain of the seas in some godly contest when the world was found. It also will let you determine some of the power levels. I mean, if you are worshiping a god who created the seas, you're going to want their followers to have water-oriented powers. And the granted powers of such a god could be very, very powerful. As opposed to if you're worshiping a god of, let's just say, a trickster god of frustration or something like that. It's a relatively smaller thing, so you're not going to want to make the faith of that particular god greater than the god of the seas. And so by coming up with the god's place in the world, you come up with sort of a hierarchy of their faiths, and it helps give you a skeleton upon which to build the entire world. And so that's why I think ultimately designing the gods first is what you want to do, because it gives you that framework to help you build your world. So hopefully I've given you guys some stuff to think about in this video. Definitely leave comments below if there's any other thoughts that you had, or if there's any interesting gods you've created for your own world that you'd like to share. I'd definitely be interested in hearing them. Other than that, I will be periodically doing other of these videos to kind of discuss the steps that I've taken to build a world, and hopefully they'll be helpful to somebody and you guys will be able to get something out of them. But other than that, thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.